up here. But it takes them a very long time to get there. We'll talk about why. They could have gone from here right there. But God knew that that wasn't a good idea because God is much smarter than us. And so God took them on a different route and they crossed the Red Sea. I mean, what if they hadn't crossed the Red Sea? Do you think they would have believed in God like they do now? No. That God did some amazing stuff for them. Like we said last week, to show them that He is the one and only true God. And sometimes they got it and sometimes they didn't. And today we want to look at what happened next. Now if you think about this, they've crossed the Red Sea. They know they're headed up this way. They don't know how to get there. They didn't have a map, okay? And so how do they know where to go? Do you remember what happened? Tell me, how did they know where to go?
Follow the cloud.
Yes. God said, just follow me. I'm going to put a big cloud up there in front of you. I'm going to be in that cloud. Follow me. If I move, you move. If I stop, you stop. That's pretty simple, right? Just follow me. Now, that works really well in the daytime. Doesn't work real well in the nighttime when you can't see the cloud. So God in His wisdom said, I'll put a pillar of fire there at night. And at night, if we want you to move, then you just follow the fire. And I'll be in the fire and I will lead you. Now that's a pretty good system. And they did that for 40 years. Yes? Was the fire hot? I would imagine it was hot, but I don't know. I mean, they're in a desert. This area that they're crossing is pretty much desert area. So it would have been kind of hot anyway. So maybe.
Except at nighttime, it gets really cold.
Except, yeah, maybe it was for warmth. I think mostly it was so they could see it at night. And so that they could follow it. And they did a pretty good job. Remember that there were like 1 million of them. Probably even more that left Egypt. We don't know exactly how many, but there's a lot of people. And Moses is trying to lead them to the promised land. So Moses probably loved this system. Moses didn't have to figure it out. All he had to do was follow in the daytime and follow at night. Stop when it stopped, move when it moves. Yes?
So I bet a few people got lost and stuff because like the people in the back they wouldn't.
Okay, do you think the people in the back might have got lost?
No, but they're following the.
Not if they kept their eyes on the cloud and the fire, right? My guess is it was huge.
Okay,
So that not only the people in the front could see it, but everybody could see it. For miles. That would be my guess.
Wait, so when did the
Because
Egyptians see it?
I would think that God was as interested in the guy in the back as He was in the guy in the front, right? And He wanted to make sure they get there. Now, maybe if you said, I'm not doing that, I'm going over here by myself, you might have got lost. But we don't know that. I think the majority at least, or probably 99% of the people followed this. Yes?
Did anyone die?
Okay, that's a good question, and I'll tell you about that in just a few minutes. She said, did anybody die during those 40 years? And yes, a lot of people died, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. So they knew where they were going. God was leading them. What else do you need if you're going through or going on a long trip like this? What do you need?
They need food.
Food. You gotta have food. Now they're in a desert. How are you gonna feed 1 million people in a desert? It's a good thing they had God, right? Because here's what God did. Look at chapter 16, verse 4. Who wants to read that? You got it? Read it for us.
For the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and that the people shall go out together a day's portion, and bring it, and that I may test them, whether or not they will walk in my law or not.
All right. God is taking these people to a new land. He wants to know, can I trust them? So the first thing He did was He rained bread from heaven, and they called it manna. Every morning, manna fell from, it would be like a snowstorm every morning, watching that manna. I would like to see what it looked like, with all that manna coming down from heaven. And they would go outside and gather it. And God said, I'm going to check and see if they really obey me. So I'm going to give them manna every single day. except on the seventh day, because that's a day of rest, right? And so he said, on the seventh day, there'll be no manna. So on the sixth day, you can gather enough for 2 days. But every other day, you just gather enough for that day. Don't be greedy. Trust me. I'll give you some again tomorrow. And the Bible says people who gather too much, like let's say on Wednesday, they're thinking, oh, I don't want to get up and do this again tomorrow. Or what if God doesn't give it to us tomorrow? I better gather extra today. And then it would get wormy and cruddy and they couldn't eat it because God wanted them to trust him every single day for 40 years. That's a long time. But that's what he did. And then the people started complaining. Let's read verse 12, 13, and 14. Who's got it? Let's go right here. 12, 13, 14. Okay, go ahead, read 12.
I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel say to them
Can you read really loud so the people in the back can hear you?
at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God.
All right, so he said, okay, I'm going to give you some meat. Every evening I'm going to give you meat so that you know that I am the Lord your God. Go ahead and read verse 13, see what happens.
In the evening, quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning, dew lay around the camp.
And verse 14.
And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like dew, fine as frost on the ground.
Okay, so in the evening, they got meat, quail. Quail is like a bird. That'd be kind of like us eating chicken. They could eat quail meat, and in the morning they would have that manna. So they had meat and bread. What else do you need?
Water.
Water. Okay, so how did they get water? They're in the desert. Tell me quickly, how'd they get water?
God cut open the stone and water came rolling out.
Okay. There were different times when God did amazing miracles to give them water. I mean, sometimes he just led them to water because there's some water out there, and he led them to pools of water. Sometimes he had to do a miracle. Who's got chapter 17, verse 6? Okay, Len, would you read it, please? Go ahead.
Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Hero, you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel.
All right. God said, Moses, they're complaining because they don't have water. So go to the rock, strike it, take your staff. Remember this trusty staff that did a lot of stuff, didn't it, with Moses? He said, strike it with your staff and water will come out of a rock. Now there is no water in a rock, is there? I could hit a rock 15 times and there's no water going to come out. So obviously this was a miracle from God, wasn't it? God said, strike the rock. He did, and water came out. Enough water for 1 million people and their animals. How amazing is that? Because he wanted them to know, I am God. I'm going to take care of you. Yes?
It's at least probably 1,000 gallons of water.
Oh, I would say yes. There's lots and lots of
Probably
gallons.
more
of
than
water.
that.
Yes. Okay. So they have food, they have water, and they know where they're going. But one of their biggest problems was, and you can imagine, that many people. Do you think they got along well with each other? We're just like that, aren't we?
Yeah.
We can't even get along with everybody in this room, let alone 1 million people. And they couldn't either. And so God said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to help you with that too. Because I want you guys to follow me. I want you to do what I say, and then you'll be able to get along with each other. So he called Moses up to a mountain and gave them some laws. What do we call those? The 10 Commandments. Yes. And if you remember, the first of the 10 Commandments are all about how to have a relationship with God. Don't have other gods. Don't make idols. Don't use his name in vain. Keep that seventh day as a holy day because it's his day. It's not your day, it's his day. And then the other 6 were about how to get along with each other. Don't steal from each other, don't kill each other, obey your parents, don't lie, all those kinds of things. And we have them recorded in Exodus chapter 20. So if you want to continue on to chapter 20, you will see them there. You see, verse 1 says, "And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me." Now, I don't know why you would want to worship another god. When you've seen this God do all those plagues in Egypt, take you through the Red Sea, give you food, give you water. But you know what? There were times when God would tell them something and the people would be just like, no, doesn't make sense to me, not doing it. That's why they ended up being in the wilderness, in the desert, for 40 years. They wouldn't have had to be. They could have gone straight in, but they disobeyed God, didn't believe that he would take care of them. And God said, well, looks like I've got to teach you a few things. So for 40 years, we're going to stay in this desert, and I'm going to teach you stuff. And you ask about people dying. All the people that were over 20 died in the wilderness. Only the young people who were under 20 got to go into the promised land when they finally got there. Of course, by the time they got to the promised land, the 20-year-olds would be what?
40. No,
60. Yeah. So they were older adults by that time. But
Why did all the 21 come?
what?
Why did
Because they were the generation that didn't believe that God could do this. So God said, okay, you're not going there. I'll let your children go there. Yes?
Are you gonna drink water?
When we're done here. Okay? All right. So, they did this for 40 years. Eventually, they came up here. God led them, again by the cloud and the fire, and they came up here to the Jordan and were ready to cross into the promised land. Moses died there, and they got a new leader. Who was he?
David.
Joshua. Joshua actually took them across the river into the promised land. How do we know all this?
The Bible.
Because it's written in here. Remember this year, we're talking about prophets. What's a prophet? Somebody who gets a message from God, gives it to the people. Moses is still, to the Jewish people, Moses is their most important prophet because he did exactly that. And how do we know what happened? Because Moses wrote it down for us. Moses wrote the book of Genesis, the book of Exodus, the book of Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. The first 5 books of the Bible were written by Moses. There's a picture here that I kind of like. He was probably an old man by this time. And he's writing all this down for us. Now, we talked about the fact that he wasn't even alive when the things in Genesis happened. That's Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham. But he wrote it. Why? How do you know? Because God told him. But he lived Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. Those are the years that he lived, and he wrote it down. Yes?
Wait, so he wrote at his own death?
Actually, the very end of Deuteronomy, there's a few verses that tell about his death. My guess is, I don't know, do we know, did Joshua write that down? Who wrote those last couple verses of Deuteronomy? Obviously, he couldn't have written it.
Probably
Right?
God.
But God had to have somebody write it down. I would guess it was Joshua, but I don't know. Yes.
I've actually heard of a miracle that happened. This guy got in a car accident and his heart stopped. And then while he was passing away, his parents said a prayer, and then all of a sudden his heart kept going.
Yes. The same God that took the children of Israel from Egypt to the promised land is still the same God that we just prayed to a little bit ago, right? Same God. Can he still do miracles today? Absolutely. And sometimes we get to hear about those or even be a part of some of those things. If we had time, which we don't right now, but I'd like to tell you sometime about some of the things God did just in this, making this building. You think we could do this on our own? No, God did some amazing stuff to give us this property and to build this building. So someday we'll talk about that, but for right now, I want to stick with Moses.
This Bible room.
Way to go.
I didn't print it.
Here, I'll fix it. Give it to me and I'll fix it before we use it again. Thank you. All right, we're going to sing, or you're going to listen to Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah. Now, I want you to really pay attention to the words of this song because they tell about what we just learned about. Okay? So listen up.
Thanks for watching.
We'll turn off the barren land, that's the desert. There's the manna. Get the light. All right, so they knew, I'm
I
sorry.
just want to ask a quick, what lessons can we learn from what
I'm going
God?
there.
Oh, okay.
Okay, they needed guidance to get from Egypt to the promised land. Where are we headed? What's our promised land? Heaven. Do we need a little help on how to get there? Do you think he can guide us there just like he guided them through the wilderness? Oh yeah, but you know what? You have to know what this book says, because this is how he guides us. He wrote it down for us, just like Moses wrote it down for them. Wrote it down, God wrote it down for us. Is that what you wanted to say?
No, I wanted to ask you, what did the Israelites and what God taught them with the fire and the cloud each day? Did they have to follow him each day?
Yeah.
Guess what God wants us to do? Spend time with him every day, right?
Each day.
That's a lesson we can take from that. So, okay, I was just
All
wondering.
right, we gotta go to our,
Can we go